So I'm going to call this meeting to order and ask their seats. Thanks for joining us. Those present, we are live streaming to the community, so the audio and video is being recorded, and I request that elected members turn off their mobile devices or at least have them to silent. We have all elected members here except for councillors Coates and Posselt, who are both here on a leave of absence. And to start with, we always do an acknowledgement to country, and I would like to start by acknowledging that modern day Hobart is built on what was the land of the Muwinina people, so the Muwinina clan, who were part of the South East Nation, and their land was taken from them without their permission or compensation. I'd like to acknowledge that the original inhabitants of this place fought against the invasion and occupation of their land in what was a serious war known at the time as the Black War, and it's also referred to as one of Australia's frontier wars. In Tasmania, this war between Tasmanian Aboriginal people and the army and settlers lasted for over 8 years, from 1826 until 1832. And there were hundreds, possibly of thousands of lives lost on both sides. I'd like to note that this is a part of our history and that we as a council acknowledge this past and that we recognise that our city has a great many important stories that deserve to be told. Okay, confirmation of minutes. Our last meeting was on the 31st of March. Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Councillor Kitsos. All those in favour of the minutes say aye. Aye. Can say no. Carried unanimously. Item 3 is the transfer of agenda items. Are there any items that anyone would like to transfer on the open agenda or closed agenda? There being none, we'll move on now. Communications from the Chair. I don't have any this month. Item 5 is the notification of council workshops, and just wanted to note that we've only had one workshop, Hobart workshop, since our last meeting. That was on the 14th of April, and that was on issues around outdoor dining policy and guidelines, potential consideration of the council office staff accommodation. Now, item 6 on our agenda is public questions, and I think we have 2 that we've received notice of. So would Sarah Callaghan, if she's here, like to come forward and ask her question? Yes, please, then that'll get picked up, yeah.
Right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Callaghan. I'm a South Hobart resident, a ratepayer and a supporter of shared use at the South Hobart Recreation Ground. A study by Flinders University reports that 74% of dog bites are in the home. In children under 10, that is 91%. The remaining 26% evenly spread between streets and highways or other, which may include vets, doggy daycare, etc., etc. My question is, please can you state how many dog attacks have been reported at South Hobart Oval or at other HCC grounds in the last 12 months? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Callaghan. I'll ask the CEO to provide the response.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So the response is that there was 1 reported dog attack at South Hobart Oval and 5 on other council reserves. There were 33 total dog attacks within the City of Hobart reported over this period.
Thank you, and the written response will be posted to you. We have another question from Mr Andrew Wilson, if he's here. Would you like to come forward, Mr Wilson, and ask your question?
Thank you. My name is Andrew Wilson. I'm a resident and ratepayer in South Hobart. I'm also a dog owner and former soccer player for South Hobart Football Club. My first question is, does the revenue from hire fees for the Soho Recreation Ground cover the full costs of ground maintenance, or only a percentage of the maintenance costs, with the shortfall having to be funded by ratepayers. Additionally, as quoted on page 144 of the publication Discovering Soho by Paul County, Ken and Vicky Morton and the South Hobart Football Club state that their ultimate dream is to build an indoor domed field at the Soho Recreation Ground. The ambitions of the South Hobart Soccer Club have clearly outgrown the suburb and greater community, and the community respectfully asks, does Council's vision for future use of the Soho Recreation Ground align with Ken and Vicky Morton / South Hobart Football Club's ambition to build an indoor domed stadium? And third, has Council had discussions with the South Hobart Football Club about an alternative, more suitable location for their soccer activities, such as Ham Common or Alinda Grove? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Wilson, and I'll ask the CEO to provide a response to those questions.
Thanks, Mr Wilson. So there are currently no council sports grounds that are self-funded, so all require significant additional funding from council's budget allocation. The council has yet to endorse the draft master plan for the South Hobart Recreation site, which in its current form doesn't include an indoor dome stadium. And in answer to your last question, we have not had any discussions with the South Hobart Football Club about an alternative location for their club.
Okay, so they're the questions we received on notice. Are there any questions from the floor? There's one here and one here. Would you like to come forward and just to the microphone, and please state your name for the record, and then ask. You can do a small preamble for your question, and then ask your question.
Okay, I'm Marla Crew. I'm a ratepayer in Hobart. I have a question about the Networking for Harmony meeting. They normally held. It's a round table of community leaders and interested people that's held not bi-monthly, once every 2 months. So just to lend some perspective to my question, at the last meeting, a few of us, myself included, raised the question of hate speech from members. So we're there for harmony. And one particular member, who's a much lauded member and has been lauded by this council as well and given accolades for her work, she had prolific posts on social media calling for violence and for people to spit on Jewish people. And we didn't think that was okay, but the chair refused to actually hear our matter. And I then insisted, because I had to give some perspective as to why I wanted my question answered and why we needed to discuss it. Well, after that meeting, it then transpired that there are no further meetings of Networking for Harmony long term. And I find that extremely unacceptable, because we're there and it's a safe space for us to actually ask questions. So why has this decision been taken?
Thank you, Ms. Crew. So the question is that why have the Networking for Harmony meetings been suspended? Is that correct? So the CEO's just indicated that he'll take that on notice, because I think there's a bit to explore with that response. Right. So we'll get the work will be done to respond to your question, and that'll be included before the next. That'll be sent to you in writing before the next council meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks. And there was another question on notice. Question from the floor.
Hi, my name's Susan Puckett. I've been a resident of South Hobart for almost 20 years. Most of this time I've owned a dog and utilised the South Hobart Recreation Ground. My questions: has the council generated any data on the extent of the local community use of the South Hobart Recreation Ground? Why was the name of the ground changed in 2022 and without any community consultation? And council staff has suggested on several occasions that mediation occur between South Hobart Football Club and the local community. When will this occur?
Okay, so I think there were three questions captured there. I'll see if the CEO wants to respond to any of them or take them on notice.
I think we'll have to take them on notice, Lord Mayor. There's a bit to unpack.
So again, we'll take those on notice. You'll be provided with a written response, and the written response will also be printed on the next council agenda, so others in the public can see your questions and the answers. Okay, if there's no further questions from the floor, we will move on to our next agenda item. So item 6.2 are the responses to questions taken on notice at our last meeting, and those have been provided in the agenda. Would someone like to move that those be noted? Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. So item 7 is petitions. We have received one petition for tabling, and a report has also been included as item 7.1 for this petition. So would someone like to move? There's no other petitions received?
No.
So move 7.1 recommendation on the petition that we received the petition was Aberdeen Street Park, a request for construction of a petanque pitch and seating. So Councillor Loberg is moving the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Kitsos. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 8 is consideration of supplementary items. There are none.
No, Lord Mayor.
Item 9 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Are there anyone would like to declare for any items on the agenda? There being none, we'll move on now to item 10, which is the draft integrated assessment report for Macquarie Point's multipurpose stadium project of state significance. Councillor Dutton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to thank the staff for the report. However, I would like to move an alternate motion, and I have circulated that. I thought I was going to have it as an alternate, as an amendment, but I think I have to move that as an alternative motion. Now, I'll read the various clauses in there. That the submission have a preamble or introduction be included at the beginning of the submission stating that Council does not support this project being built at this location because the negative impacts outweigh the positives. The preamble also summarizes Council consistent concerns such as 1, significant damage to places of heritage significance, Hunter Street President and Cenotaph, and Hobart's heritage tourism brand. 2, the lost opportunity of what will be an inactive precinct for most of the year in a prime and strategic location for the city. 3, the significant environmental concerns raised by EPA in their submission to the TPC. 4, the impact of the Northern Road in cutting off community access to the river. 5, the very poor process that led to this point, including the AFL overriding the approved plan for Macquarie Point and the abandonment of the POS process. And 6, the lack of critical transport infrastructure to support a functional stadium. And B, that a section of social and community issues be also addressed. 1, be written to include the perspectives and information from local organizations, drawing on the perspectives of the Palawa community, the RSL, the TSO, the city's Heritage Advisory Committee, and other organizations who have provided information on the social and community issues. 2, this section could also draw on community consultations on the MDDC precinct plan, as well as community polling that has taken place on this project. 3, this section should outline and reflect the concerns that the Council have expressed to date about the processes to date in the form of decisions and submissions. The anecdotes provided from desktop research about other cities provided by AEC Consulting provides no local perspectives and does not draw on local research. This is not relevant for this section of the submission. 4, the section reviewing the economic impact of the proposal include equal coverage of both the studies commissioned by the Council. And C, also that a section be included to explain the due cost considerations. Council was not able to undertake an in-depth economic study that would have been able to draw on local data. And also note that its own economic studies were not able to consider and discount relevant matters such as foregone or opportunity cost. That is, other events that may be harmed, impact on heritage tourism brand, other providers that would lose income, that is, for example, conference, and alternative uses of the site that may be more frequently used, profitable, and productive. I reserve my right to speak to it later.
Okay, I'd need a seconder. Have you got a seconder, Councillor Kitsos? Okay. Discussion. Alderman Bloomfield.
I just had a question. This is a submission that's got to go in. What's the due date for this submission that we have to get this in? Because this is a bit of a rewrite and I just don't know if it's feasible.
Mr Noy.
Lord Mayor, the open mine.
Okay, so there's a bit of time. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Councillor Kitsos.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Dutta, for bringing that alternate motion to the table this evening. Look, I think this is really important that we do consider this afternoon. What we're being asked to do is to endorse the City's draft submission in response to the also draft integrated assessment report for the Macquarie Point Stadium. And I want to be very clear that while I acknowledge and support the work undertaken by the City in preparing this detailed submission, I do not support the Macquarie Point Stadium project. The City's submission is thorough and highlights many critical issues which in my view are so significant that they should have led to only one logical conclusion, that this project should not proceed. However, I support the comments made by Councillor Dutta that this submission does not go far enough, and that is why I have seconded this motion. First, the fact that the state government has moved to abandon the project of state significant process and instead introduce enabling legislation should concern all of us deeply. It sends a very clear message that adding processes, public representations and independent assessments will be swept aside when it comes to political inconvenience. The government claims that submissions like ours will still be considered, but without the POS framework in place, that promise rings hollow. Turning to the substance of the City's submission that we're looking at in the meeting this afternoon, I completely agree with the City and the panel that the scope of the project must include the related infrastructure, such as the Northern Access Road, the Collins Street pedestrian bridge. Without these critical pieces of infrastructure, the stadium simply cannot function safely, and yet incredibly they were excluded from the original application. Without the Northern Access Road, we risk locking up the key freight and port activities and worsening congestion across the city, especially during stadium events. Without the Collins Street pedestrian bridge, we cannot guarantee the safe and efficient movement of tens of thousands of people back into the CBD on game day. This is not just an inconvenience, it would put real pressure on our roads, our footpaths and our public safety. It would create serious risks for emergency access and add gridlock to our already congested city, gridlocking Davies Street, the Brooker Avenue and the broader city centre. In short, the impacts would not be only confined to Macquarie Point. They would ripple out and affect the function of Hobart itself. I also share the concerns raised about the stadium's massive and disproportionate scale. Our city's own urban design experts and the independent panel have found that this structure would fundamentally conflict with the form, identity and character of Hobart's waterfront. Our heritage is at risk. The dismantling and dislocation and relocation of the historic goods shed without an updated conservation management plan shouldn't be acceptable to any of us. Hobart's colonial era built environment is a defining feature of our city, and it is central to why people choose to live and work and visit here. It must be protected and not sacrificed to make way for an oversized and out-of-place development. I also note the city's concerned about the Aboriginal heritage, and I must stress this even more strongly. The lack of meaningful engagement with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community and the inadequate documentation of Aboriginal cultural values is fundamental to this project, and it is an unacceptable failure. I continue on with the environmental concerns. As the City and the panel both acknowledge, site contamination, groundwater management, stormwater runoff and the disposal of excavated material all present serious unresolved risks. There's no certainty about how these issues will be managed, and the risk of further harm to the River Derwent and the surrounding areas is very real. Finally, the construction program itself is chaotic. The proponent has provided no detailed or reliable construction sequencing. The risk of overlap with other major projects at Mac Point could cause cost blowouts, traffic disruption and serious impacts on the city's functioning, not to mention the risk of construction noise on nearby neighbours and the TSO. So while the city's submission rightly highlights and responds to these issues, I feel that Councillor Dutter's alternate motion this afternoon is much clearer and illustrates the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. We must reject this project altogether. I cannot and I will not support the stadium. This project is wrong for Hobart, it's wrong for our community, and it's wrong for the future of our city. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Some of what I was going to say has just been said by Councillor Kitsos, so I won't go over it again just to save time, but I will sort of talk about the larger issue for me. It's no secret that I'm completely opposed to this stadium. It is an unnecessary and ruinous duplication of two existing AFL grounds that we already have. The debate really is not about the team at all, in my opinion. It's about the Liberal government continuing to artificially stimulate the Tasmanian economy and potentially damage the state's finances while they do it, to pay for a succession of gigantic concrete monoliths that duplicate infrastructure that we already have. It really has to stop. I thank Councillor Duttor for this particular amendment. I will be supporting this, and I do think it's far stronger than the previous, than the recommendation that it's replacing. But I would make the point that I am actually completely opposed to the stadium, full stop. Thank you, Chair.
Alderman Zuko.
I just have a question through you to whoever can answer it, Lord Mayor. It's been stated that the Liberal government is pushing this through Parliament. Could someone just answer the question whether it's Labor and Liberal pushing this proposal through Parliament? Can someone answer that for me, please?
I can answer that and just say at this stage we don't know who will vote for the process, but it is the Premier who's potentially drafting legislation to replace the POS process. Further discussion? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Look, initially I was actually happy to take no position on the stadium and see how it pans out and see if it follows that particular process, and as we were not the planning authority allocated to it, I just thought we'd sit there and look at the process. But unfortunately, the government has decided, it seems, potentially that they're not going to follow their own process. And so I think for me, the structure around the POS process and actually following that process, but then making the decision potentially to not follow that process, that to me is quite shocking. I mean, my goodness, the evidence on this sporting franchise called a once-in-a-lifetime game-changer stadium, which lacks positives according to many reports and research on post-construction on stadiums, cost-benefit ratios and even planning documents needed as part of the POS process to support the viability and feasibility of this stadium. All of these reports, the evidence that we have, they just don't stack up. And it's not about the fact that these are weak excuses. These are actually strong reasons for why the government actually needs to follow the structure of the POS process. And really to make the decision to not follow that process, it really just lack structural integrity, like a chocolate sandal sitting in the sun in the tropics. To me, there is no integrity behind that decision to not have it as part of the process. And I'd just like to do just a little bit of a summary. The stadium design and functionality, here's a summary. Lack of clarity on its integration into the surrounding precinct. Reports do not sufficiently explain how the stadium will function. Public domain design along the eastern edge is unclear. The reports do not describe how the stadium is part of an integrated precinct. The application should provide a concept for the ground plane and those buildings, but there is no proof of concept. No evidence has been provided as to why the project has been cited in this particular way. The goods shed has already been noted. Here's the summary. The methods for dismantling and relocation of the goods shed have not been stated. An updated CMP has not been provided, nor has a detailed methodology and construction plan that shows relocation is technically possible and precisely how it would be undertaken. The Aboriginal heritage has also been covered off by my colleagues, so I won't repeat that. But I do want to note the transport and movement, as has been highlighted by the Movement Technical Review by GHD, and they really note 3 key risks. The assessment relies on strategic modelling, which was limited and often conservative assessment of the performance impacts. The recommendations rely on a significant amount of uncommitted and unfunded projects. There is not an assessment of suitability of mitigations of issues identified. It goes on to further talk about how some of the key emissions include event transport strategy, traffic pedestrian management strategy, parking management strategy, travel demand management strategy, no bus staging layover for the Northern Access Road, and it really also notes that there's reliance on particular assumptions, and the submission relies on assumptions which has not undertaken sufficient analysis. It goes on to talk about how these include that there will be no CBD road diversions, the people choosing to drive will park in the CBD parking garages, that there will be sufficient bus fleet drivers and park and ride spaces to fulfil the forecast of the demand. There's also other aspects that report looked at, which is the implementation of other projects, as has already been outlined by my learned colleague. Really, there are just so many aspects to this particular submission that I just can't support. The impact of professional sports franchises and venues on local economies and post-stadium construction research also looks at the actual flow-on effects after the stadium has been built. In fact, there are so many journal articles in journals such as Sport and Social Issues, Empirical Economics, Public Budgeting and Finance, Critical Sociology, Urban Affairs, Sports Management and Economic Development. And I'd like to just quote something that has been stated by Kuan Petharam with regards to the various different pieces of research on post-stadium economics, I suppose. So rife is the manipulation of economic messaging and dissemination. Sorry, can I just have an extension of time for 3 minutes, please?
Moved by Councillor Harvey, seconded by Councillor Lohberger. All those in favour say aye. Consent no carried unanimously. 3 minutes.
And dissemination of falsehoods by stadium boosters. This phenomenon has even spawned its own body of research, with economists investigating topics such as the paradox of governments continuing to subsidise stadiums despite overwhelming evidence of their economic ineffectiveness. There are further glaring and outstanding issues, and I mean, if we were the planning authority and we had documents that we received as part of a planning process or an assessment process, and probably I could safely say any planning authority that is looking at an application and has to apply it on its merits against the relevant criteria, and all you have from the documents is words like this: no assessment made, information limited, lacks sufficient detail, sufficient analysis not undertaken, unable to make findings due to absence of lack of feedback, design is unclear, the relationship between the development and adjacent mixed-use developments is not well defined, methods not stated, lack of clarity on its integration into the precinct. These are just some of the words. So what decision would you make if you had some of that came to you? And I'm just going to stop here, I suppose, and not talk about some of the issues that have been raised in terms of things that are not addressed or missing, like risks to human health or the environment, detailed soil and water management plan, noise, vibration, groundwater, excavated material management, wind effects, lights, construction program and sequencing. And I'd like to just add something from what Bernard Keane said. There's no role for sincere participation in such a process. The decision has been made as a result of the exercise of power, not the contest of ideas. An immensely powerful institution, the AFL, has dictated to a small state that it will only be granted a team with a new, expensive stadium. A supine state government and opposition have kowtowed to it and engaged a large audit firm to deliver the paraphernalia of policy development while intending to proceed anyway. Consultation, examination, the contest of ideas is meaningless. Indeed, you are only legitimising a predetermined process. Bureaucrats who understand this will merely get out of the way of the project or enable it. Those who don't, who stubbornly insist on doing their job, will be routed around as so much damage. It's a process that is enabled by the heavy reliance on consultants to deliver bespoke policy justifications, the decline of the influence of genuine policy experts within bureaucracies that trump the public interest. And so I'd like to finish by saying, well, what is actually occurring here? So what, we just get out of the way? And I think that's a sad alternative. What is the alternative? We say nothing. We allow undemocratic processes to prevail. We allow one application process for some and another application process for the government. I mean, I have to say to the Tasmanian government, the hyperbole aside, the rhetoric aside, the ethos and pathos commentary aside, what does this say about you? What does this say about your leadership? And what does this say about the confidence that the Tasmanian people are going to have in your decision to not follow your own rules when everybody must?
Further discussion? Any further discussion on Councillor Dutter's amendment? Councillor Kelly, you're looking at me. No?
So if this goes through, we won't be discussing the other motion, of course, through this will be certainly, yeah. Well, in that case, I will make some commentary on it.
I just want to clarify that the submission will still be submitted, but just with those amendments. So, yeah.
Look, I'm not going to repeat what's been said about all the statistics and the good and bad, which there is a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. I try and take a middle road and not be too dogmatic about, you know, what my personal opinion may be, or just because certain things are bad doesn't mean there are not good things there. So, and that's the vibe I get too from a lot of people in the community. I think it's not just polarised with you're with us or you're against us. And I think we should never, as a council, lose sight of the fact that there is a middle thought process here and a middle group of people that have a somewhat different opinion to an extreme yes or an extreme no. Well, you know, I've went to all the workshops and all that. The Luca report we had last week was, I mean, they put some damn compelling stuff in there. I mean, it's based on facts and figures. It's not emotive. You know, things like 813 full-time jobs will be provided post-construction, plus all the construction jobs. There's a huge economic flow. There's all the employment that it gives during as well. That's got to be good. However, the downside too from my side is, I mean, I've done a lot of development applications, and I mean, I can virtually put a stick in the ground without having reports and having to wait long times and be questioned and all that. So I'm just sad that the whole process has not been transparent enough and fair enough, and all of this could have been put up front. I mean, I'm not happy with the look of the building, the size of that roof, and even though there is rumour now that the roof's not even going to be on there, but that may not happen. We've got to go what's on the table at the moment. Indeed, the whole building looks like probably called the Big Mac. It looks like a McDonald's hamburger as it sits wedged in against the cenotaph, which is very sad. Would I like to see a game of football there? Absolutely. I'd love to see it. I'd love to stream out from there with all the people into the streets of Hobart and engage in all the great stuff that happens from such activities. And I could go on and on with that sort of stuff. I will, however, support this. I think it probably goes a little bit too far, but I know I can read the votes, what's going to happen here if I don't support this. it will usurp the substantive motion. So, that being said, I will support this with a heavy heart in a way, and I just think it's sending a message to the government of the day. They've got to be more transparent, and we as a council have got to be engaged more. If it's good enough for one part of the society to have to go through a rigid planning process and be transparent, I think it's good enough for everyone else. So, whilst the government's intentions may be good and honourable at the end of the day, I think we've got to send a message that we've got to be consistent with the way our community and moreover the way the planning scheme is should be respected.
Just before Councillor Elliott, you speak, I just need to clarify with the staff about the motion, because my understanding is that Councillor Duttor is proposing that the submission as drafted goes in, but with these changes. Is that the understanding of the staff as well?
That's my understanding, Lord Mayor, that the
Councillor Kelly's
amendment. How would you term this? Just curiosity.
A different motion was put by Councillor Duttor than the recommendation. So that's up. That's something that council can do. Our recommendation is a recommendation.
Just clarification, Lord Mayor. I'm taking it that is the motion.
That is the motion.
This is not the motion here.
That's right.
That's the motion. Okay, thank you.
I guess I just wanted to clarify that does the motion say that this piece of work still goes in, but just with amendments? Is that
No, it doesn't say there that the submission to the... I'm sure it says that. That's a submission, correct, in here? This is a submission? That's a submission, and it says that the submission, and then it adds to it. So I'd say it does.
Yeah. The submission that's attached. The draft submission that's attached. Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. If I had $1 billion, it's not how I would spend the money, but I think we actually need to shift gears in this council, because it is more than largely, it is out of our hands whether this stadium's going to happen or not, and I think it will happen. I reckon we'll have ground break probably before the end of the year. And I think we need to not kid ourselves around how can we allow this to proceed. It's already happening without us. No one's asking for permission from us. So I really do think we need to shift our focus around stamping our foot and saying we must reject this altogether and no stadium, no stadium. It's moved past that. The ship sailed, and it will sail further once the enabling legislation passes. I think we need to shift into a mode of acceptance that it is going to happen, and then how can we address the legitimate concerns? Because there are legitimate concerns around parking, transport, landscaping, activation, access, and more. I absolutely agree that there are concerns there, and we have a place to advocate for addressing those concerns and for problem solving and raising suggestions. So I think we need to have an attitude shift in here, and also particularly in writing with the government, coming from a place from this is what's happening, this is the design, notwithstanding that some of us hate it, some of us like it, some of us will be there at the football. I won't be at the football, but I'll be at music gigs and whatever else. We need to accept that it's happening now. Now is the time to accept that it's happening, because all the stamping of feet in the world isn't going to change it. It's out of this room's control, but we can constructively input ideas in how to solve some of the problems. So, yeah, I think the foot stamping needs to stop, because we're on to the next stage now. We're on to addressing the issues, and also how can we improve, what do we need to provide to improve the livability of the state? Because I do think that the stadium will mature the city. I think it will bring more people into the city. It'll raise our profile. We're going to have more people probably wanting to come and live here, and we have a genuine role in housing them, and the parks and the facilities and transport. So let's shift gears into that space, because we're already kind of embarrassing ourselves with our foot stomping and requesting meetings with the AFL. It's getting a bit embarrassing now. So I think let's accept that it's happening. People don't like not having control. I can certainly relate to that. But It's out of our control. It is highly, highly likely happening. We've been stamping our foot for a year or so, or putting longer. It's not working. It's not going to work. So let's shift gears.
Further discussion? Councillor Alderman Bloomfield.
It's funny, with this particular proposed motion, it suggests that the initial submission that was drawn up was somehow in favour of it. It wasn't. And in fact, a lot of the points made tonight are already in that submission. And I quite liked the way it was drawn up because it was professional, it was even-handed. It allowed the good points and the bad points to be presented fairly. And anyone would know that in a debate, if you fail to acknowledge the good and only acknowledge the bad, you actually you diminish your argument. We need to be mature with our proposal and our submission, and as a result, as much as it would be great to amp it up, make it stronger, make it harsher, I actually feel that we would get further by doing the initial rather than this proposed one.
Further discussion? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've actually spoken to the alternative motion, but I was just wondering if I could propose an amendment to this and maybe if...
Yes, that's allowed. Did Councillor Harvey want to speak to the... Do you want to say anything or anyone else? But no, you can move an amendment at any time. We can always come back to it. You're moving an amendment. Someone will need
clarification, Lord Mayor. The Deputy's spoken already to the motion that's before us.
Yes, you can move an amendment separately.
I don't think so. The person has spoken. I don't think so.
My understanding.
We're debating the motion now, not debating an amendment.
But at any time, a member can move an amendment from the floor, I think, is my understanding. And it's a separate, that happens all the time, I think.
Am I allowed to move an amendment?
Never happened before.
So the advice
It happens all the time.
Only when they're speaking.
It's only when they're speaking.
Only when you're speaking.
Let's just double check, because my understanding is that you needed to have done it when you were speaking.
So I've got here section 17, at a meeting a councillor who did not move or second a motion, the original motion, which Deputy Lord Mayor didn't do, may move an amendment to the original motion. The councillor is not to move to amend another motion while the previous motion to amend that other motion is before the meeting. The chairperson may refuse to accept more than 2 motions to amend another motion. So I think it would be if Councillor Dutta or Councillor Kitsos tried to move an amendment, they wouldn't be allowed to.
Rules change every 5 minutes.
That's okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Lord Mayor. That aligns with my thinking. I think there's a distinction between speaking and moving, yes, the Deputy hasn't moved or seconded the motion we're debating.
Thank you. So just to clarify, I haven't moved the motion or seconded the motion. I'm just trying to put in an amendment, and I know that previously people have done that, and the mover of the original amendment has then motion has accepted an amendment. I'd actually wanted to just touch on what Councillor Kelly was talking about with regards to the briefing that we had from the AEC report.
Point of order, Lord Mayor. The Deputy is speaking to the motion in which Councillor Kelly spoke after the Deputy.
What's your
My point of order is this is not speaking in accordance to meeting procedures.
Can I put my amendment?
Now, the Deputy has spoken. The next speaker was Councillor Kelly. No, Councillor Lohberger. The Deputy is making comments regarding Councillor Kelly's statements, which were after the Deputy spoke to the motion. Now, if you're going to allow this amendment, fine, but the Deputy could just stand up and move an amendment, which I don't believe is in accordance to meeting procedures.
Okay, thank you.
It's the third time I'm bringing meeting procedures to the fore. We'll see who's right at the end.
Thank you very much.
I'll let it go.
Thank you very much, Alderman Zuko. I'll just put my amendment. and the amendment is this, that council note that council, as part of its submission, it's there essentially stating that the economic impact information provided in the AEC report adopts input-output modelling where multipliers used in the assessment were derived from a parent table, in this case the 2021-22 Australian Transaction Table, without undertaking any primary data collection in Hobart, and that the AEC report confesses to use an economic model that assumes there is no budget constraint in place for residents and no supply-side constraints. That council, as part of its submissions, note that the Australian Bureau of Statistics has stated that while IO multipliers may be useful as summary statistics to assist in understanding the degree to which an industry is integrated into the economy, their inherent shortcomings make them inappropriate for economic impact analysis. It notes that the limitations stated in the AEC report on the negative reliability of input-output analysis regarding the potential economic impact to the city. It includes equal coverage of both the studies commissioned by the Council, the SGS Economics and AEC report, and note that an economic impact study is not an evaluation tool to demonstrate the cost-benefit analysis of the proposal. And I'll just delete 5 because it has already been addressed in the prior alternative
Right, so is there a
motion.
seconder for your amendment?
I just would like to see if Councillor Duffer would
No, I still
consider-
need a seconder.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Lohberger is seconding your amendment. Okay, did you want to speak to your amendment?
Can someone second who's already spoken?
Doesn't matter. We're talking about moving and seconding.
Okay,
motions.
all right. Yep.
Look, we now
What are you
have the
talking about?
amendment in front of us, so we are going to.
The amendment, you're going to incorporate the amendment? No, I'm not going to speak to the amendment, no.
Okay. All right. So we have an amendment in front of us, so I'll take separate comments on the amendment, as is how we always do with our meeting procedures. Would you like to speak further to your amendment, Deputy Lord Mayor, as to the reasoning?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd just like to speak to the amendment, not the motion. I'd like to strongly highlight that the figures that were contained in the AEC report only relate to the City of Hobart, nothing else. The scope and limitation of this report relates only to the potential economic benefits of the capital city. I'm grateful for the figures, but we have to understand how the figures were arrived at, the process, the modelling, and what they represent. What is used is a methodology apparently relevant for this field. I believe that none of us around this particular table are economists, but some of us may have knowledge in the economic space. But I do also understand that we have capabilities in research. So I spent some time over the weekend actually talking to academics, professionals, and other economists in this particular space. The AEC report used an input-output modelling. The Australian Productivity Commission notes regarding input-output modelling, which the AEC uses, and I quote, "Abuse of input-output modelling primarily relates to overstating the economic importance of specific regional activities. Claims that jobs gained directly from the cause being promoted will lead to cascading gains in the wider economy often fail to give any consideration to the restrictive nature of the assumptions required for input-output multipliers. In particular, these applications fail to consider the opportunity cost of both spending measures and alternate uses of resources and may misinform policymakers. The Australian Bureau of Statistics notes that it provides users with the IO tables and encourages them to create their own multipliers using methods and assumptions that best suit their needs. The AEC report adopts input-output modelling where multipliers used in the assessment were derived from sub-regional transaction tables by developing regional estimates of gross production and purchasing patterns based on a parent table. So what's the parent table, you may ask? It's the 2021-22 Australian or National Transactional Table. Therefore, by its own confession, the AEC report notes that they did not use any primary Tasmanian data. It used some Tasmanian data in employment data in location quotients, which places the figures generated into the realm of needing to be treated with a great deal of caution. The ABS also notes, and I quote, "The multipliers can show just the first round of effects or the aggregated effects once all secondary effects have flowed through the system. And I have to note that in the present AEC report, it hasn't flowed through the system. But by far the most important thing I think that the ABS stated was that the publication of multipliers was discontinued with release of the 2001-02 table. And why was it discontinued? Because according to the ABS, and I quote, against the backdrop that production of multipliers was discontinued for several reasons, and there was considerable debate in the user community as to their suitability for the purposes to which they were most commonly applied. That is, to produce measures of the size and impact of a particular project. These shortcomings mean that IO multipliers are likely to significantly overstate the impacts of projects or events. We all also received an email from Professor Peter Phibbs, and he is also renowned for the work that he does in this particular space, and he advised us that there was inbuilt limitations to the input-output model which the AEC relies on. Of particular note is the expenditure switching, the substitution effect. So the Hobart LGA residents are to spend money at the venue and outside the venue without having any impact on their other household expenditure. Clearly this is not true. Building a stadium does not suddenly create additional household income for Hobart LGA residents. They will need to reduce some expenditure to compensate for their stadium event related expenditure. If the industry sectors in which they reduce expenditure are more employment intensive than the stadium related sectors, there will be a net reduction in employment, not an increase. The issue is referred to as expenditure switching or the substitution effect, and is often ignored in the stadium impact studies by way of maximising economic impacts. He also notes in his report and review that no supply side constraints was considered as one of the assumptions and limitations. There is a similar issue on the construction side, an assumption of the IO model that the authors acknowledge on page 30. Sorry, can I just have 2 extra minutes?
Moved by Councillor Harvey, seconded by Councillor Kitsos. All those in favour say aye. Can say no.
No.
Okay. All those in favour, raise your hands.
Point of order, Lord Mayor. This is inappropriate. Section 22, debate at council meeting. Right? A councillor at a council meeting is not to speak more than 5 minutes on a motion. We have got a motion and we've had an amendment. Right? We're still speaking to the motion and amending the motion. Right? And just one moment, sorry, I haven't finished yet. The second point of order is a councillor at the meeting may speak once to a motion. Now, that was my point before. My point was that the deputy had spoken to the motion, had sat down and spoken once. Now she's speaking twice.
Alderman Zuko, we have done amendments and people speaking separately.
It's okay. It's my point of order. It's okay. You want to argue it? That's fine.
I'd just like to clarify, this is not a motion, this is an amendment. So that just doesn't apply to what you've just stated. Sorry, my apologies.
Lord Mayor, I've asked that the deputy has spoken already more than 5 minutes, an extension has been given, and now still to the motion on the amendment. Thank you.
Amendments are considered separate to motions under the Local Government Act, and that's how it's always been done, Alderman Zuko. Do you still want to proceed with your extra? We'll do that vote. Or
Absolutely, I'd like to proceed.
We need to do the vote on that.
Thanks.
So all those in favour of the extra 2 minutes say aye. Against say no. No. Show of hands, I think that was...
Favour, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Harvey and the Mayor.
And against?
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Kelly.
Okay, 2 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. So just to come back to the no supply side constraints, and I'll keep it short, that is, it is assumed that we can build the stadium without having any impact on any other construction sector activity. In a small economy like Hobart, this assumption will not apply, and it is very likely that the output of residential construction will be impacted. That was stated in the report that we received from Professor Phibbs. Lord Mayor, I'd just like to add that the assumptions and limitations of this kind of modelling was buried in the Appendix A of the AEC report. An economic impact study is not an evaluation tool for economic analysis of cost benefit for the proposal. And this kind of study, using the input-output model as per the information I have detailed previously and the scholarly work on this kind of modelling, it overstates the impacts based on this model and method of input-output modelling. The economic analysis aspect of our submission does not do justice and does not include equal coverage of both the studies commissioned by the Council, which is the SGS Economics and AEC report. So to suggest that a stadium is going to make money for Tasmanians across the state, that kind of suggested impact needs a caution. Thank you very much.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment that's in front of us? Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to thank Councillor Sherlock for bringing on this amendment. It really mirrors a lot of my concerns about that AEC report. I will just run through them. Some of them are a bit repetitive, unfortunately, but in particular, I felt the report was written out of Queensland and uses mainly national inputs to come up with a conclusion about Hobart, which I think really draws a bit of a line under it. It is not a cost-benefit analysis. It has not included the many potential costs of the project to the community, and not least the opportunity cost of building this unnecessary stadium in Hobart's prime urban redevelopment site. It is overly optimistic, assuming, for instance, that the stadium will host a 5-day Test cricket match every year, when we know Test cricket is not played every year in Hobart now, and it's not even possible in this particular stadium that we are debating due to the roof structure casting shadows on the pitch. The report assumes there will be no negative impact on construction elsewhere in the state, and as mentioned by Councillor Sherlock, it is more than likely that residential construction will be impacted in Tasmania and especially in Hobart. Most importantly, the report ignores the substitution effect, which is summed up by the old saying about robbing Peter to pay Paul. It assumes money spent by locals attending the stadium will have no impact on their other household expenditure. But I mean, it's clearly wrong. The stadium won't generate any extra money for local people. It will simply redirect some of their expenditure away from existing Hobart businesses. So the point is, I guess, that this AEC report is a very blunt tool. I don't believe it's a particularly appropriate tool to use to assess this particular project, and I support these amendments. Thank you, Chair.
Further discussion on the amendments? Councillor Kitsos.
Lord Mayor, look, I have some concerns about the AEC report as well. You know, as someone with academic research experience, I find it really concerning when people don't do a review of the literature that's out there, because what an academic literature review does is it actually tells you what we already know about a topic, and then you can build on that information and critique it as you will. So although that may not have been part of the brief of the AEC report for the requirement of this particular submission, as opposed to a peer-reviewed journal article, it still is concerning for me. And I'd like to just draw your attention to the fact that there is a significant amount of literature that is available on this topic. So this is not the first stadium that's been built, it's not the first stadium that's been built in a city, and it's not the first stadium that's been built in Australia. So we already know a lot of the answers to these questions. We don't need to build ours to wait and see. So one of the quotes that I would like to share with you this afternoon is from an Australian study in the Australian Economic Review that concludes, economic theory and empirical tests of such possible benefit unambiguously show that sports facilities cannot be expected to stimulate local economies. The lesson is clear. Before agreeing to subsidise a sports facility with public funds, residents should ask themselves what they expect to receive in return. And realistically, it cannot be a more vibrant local economy. I'd also like to read some numbers to you from the TPC report. So it says that the capital core cost of the stadium is $653.4 million. Once you add the related infrastructure, $774 million. Once you add the preliminary report and other expected costs, you're up around $1 billion. The state needs to borrow $992 million to succeed with this project, with an additional state debt 10 years on from the project of $1.82 million. The benefit cost ratio is estimated to be 0.53 in the TPC report, which means that we are losing money on this. This project will not provide economic benefit. It will be creating intergenerational debt to Tasmanians who already are under-resourced. And in fact, to add to this, in terms of stimulating the economy and the facts that are laid out in the AEC report, the TPC report says that the total ongoing jobs is only estimated to be 203 to 238. So I'm concerned that there's differences in the data, that it's not based on relevant input models, and I'm really concerned that they haven't done a literature review to look at what we already know about stadiums, which is clearly that they actually don't bring economic stimulation as would be expected.
Further discussion on the amendment. Alderman Bloomfield.
I guess I'd like to make the point that while I really appreciate that the room has put a lot of work into looking at the way this data was collated, the fact that it wasn't local and all the rest of it, just imagine if the same amount of effort had been put into the Collins Street impact, because this is exactly the type of thing that I was talking about, the impact on the CBD with major projects. Yet that was walked past, and today, with the motivation being that they don't want this project, all of a sudden, look, the data doesn't stack up. The data has never stacked up with these types of assessments. I'm just grateful that finally, this room understands how these things don't work. You can't take something from another area and plonk it into Hobart and think it works. It doesn't. So I'm just incredibly cynical with this current assessment of this room, and frankly, I do feel that this is almost out of scope of what we were intending to do in the first place, which is simply look at putting through the submission, which has now been perverted quite profoundly and become far more political than what we actually needed, which was simply a submission to the government as requested. We already had a very professional one, and here we have an amendment which has politicised it more.
Further discussion on the amendment. Councillor Harvey.
Briefly, Lord Mayor, just to pick up the point that Alderman Bloomfield made, I think comparing 3 blocks of bike lanes for a few $100,000 compared to $1 billion stadium, I don't think that's a really good comparison. A good comparison, though, might be what would the outcome have been if we had gone ahead, or if the initial DAs for Mac Point had have been acted on, had they have gone ahead, that were approved a number of years ago for mixed-use precinct, which would have included housing as well as other mixed-use activities, including hotels and entertainment precinct, cultural precincts, Indigenous, what was it called?
Truth and Reconciliation.
Reconciliation area as well. That would have been a good comparison to a stadium, and it might have shown that the stadium really doesn't stack up compared to other alternative uses for the site. So I'm happy with this here. I'll just leave it at that, and I'll talk to the main motion soon.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Councillor Elliott.
Yes. What is the status of this, the resolution of this amendment, when it turns out that the meeting procedures weren't followed? Does that mean the resolution is invalid, or?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, that is a proposition that hasn't been tested. But what I would say is that the rulings of the chair per the regs are final. So I think a decision made in good faith by the council based on a ruling of the chair is still lawful.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to also do a point of order, so I have that on record as well, that I also think this is in breach of section. Point of order in accordance with 23(1)(c), contrary to the Act and regulations. Thanks.
Forward, because I can make a ruling on it.
I have a point of order on this, the speaking twice issue, and my point of order is 23(1)(c). So just for the minutes.
Oh, okay. And which part of the Act would you say it's in contrary to?
Because you're not allowed to speak twice to a motion, and your statement that a motion and amendment are different, I don't agree with.
It's how we've operated ever since you've been on council, Councillor Elliott. So no,
Thank you.
It's all the time.
No.
Okay. All right. No, I don't accept that point.
Looking forward to it coming out in another apology. I said I'm looking forward to it coming out and another apology.
That's point of order, Lord Mayor.
No, I'll let it slide, but yeah, a point of order is ruling. The ruling of the chair is final, so we'll leave it at that.
You asked me to repeat myself, so I did.
So we will now move on to any further discussion on the amendment. Before we move on the amendment, Councillor Kelly, did you want just on this?
So just to clarify, so we're now voting on this amendment?
Yes.
Not the prior amendment?
That was a motion. That was a motion. Yeah, that was the motion.
Okay, yeah. Yep. Was that, yeah, okay. And, okay, so it just gets up, we won't be voting on the substantive motion.
We still will go back to that.
We still will.
Yes.
We'll go back to it.
Thank you. We've spoken on the substantive motion.
Yes, thank you.
So if you want to speak to this one. So there's no further discussion on the amendment. I might just say a few words on the amendment. Look, I think what we're seeing here tonight is a little bit of the results of perhaps not the ideal process for drafting a very important submission for the council. The draft submission that we have in front of us is a really important document, and we've spent a lot of money on reports on it. About, I'm understanding it's about $160,000.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, are you speaking to the amendment?
I am. And so the report is very important for the council, for the community, because it is such a huge project, and the community do care what its elected members think, and they do want its elected members to speak and give our opinions, because we are, and our organisation are, very expert in how Hobart works, in urban planning, and a whole range of things that are relevant. So the council's view, the council's submission is really important. The draft submission does quote heavily from a report that I think the deputy is trying to provide some feedback on. And the elected members received that report, I think, last Wednesday, is my understanding. And there's been no opportunity to workshop that piece of research, to ask questions about it. I think there was a briefing, but I'm not sure there was really sufficient time to really go into the details. So what we're seeing here now is the only way, really, that elected members can officially give their feedback to a really important document that we have to put our names on. And it's our submission, and if we have concerns about some of the elements of the research that's in that submission, unfortunately, this is our time to do it. So although this is quite a technical amendment, I will support it because I think this is where we are. This submission will be on the council's website. People will refer to it. As I said, it's our names that will be on it as the council approving it. So it is really important that we have an opportunity to speak to the submission and to provide feedback. And the only way to provide feedback in a formal council meeting is through amendments or motions. So I think it's totally understandable, and the concerns that have been raised about some elements of the report, perhaps in a workshop setting, if we'd had a bit more time, would have been different. But I think for the reasons, I do see some concerns. This is really just feedback to go back to the staff, that they can reflect some of this feedback into the final submission before it does go to the council, before it does go to the government, or the TPC, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. No. Show of hands, all those in favour.
Councillor Dutta, Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Harvey. The Deputy's hand is up, and the Lord Mayor.
And against?
Alderman Zurko, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Kelly. And Alderman Bloomfield, my apologies.
Okay, that has carried the amendment. We will now go back to the motion as amended. Now, with this particular motion, if there's anyone who hasn't spoken on
Lord Mayor.
Councillor Dutta's motion, Councillor Harvey.
Lord Mayor, I'd like to thank the council officers for putting together a really, I think, a good submission, which has been added to tonight by these amendments. And that submission is a really great consolidation of the numerous red flags that associated with this project. And they, you know, that's come from UDAP, from the Tas Planning Commission, the Heritage Committee of Council, but the TPC as well. And I feel that had this have gone through the TPC, it might not have been approved. More than likely, it would have been rejected. Consequently, the state government has taken it upon themselves to bypass that process and look at enabling legislation, which I think is a real act of bastardry on their behalf, and they should be shamed. They should feel shame for doing that, because it's let down the public in Hobart. It's let down the process.
So, Councillor Harvey, no one's raised a point of order, but can I just encourage you not to use that language in the chamber?
Yep, but the numerous red flags that have been raised by this project, I think would have led to the TPC rejecting this project. Subsequently, the state government has gone around the process and introduced this legislation to bypass that process, because they, I feel, think that this project wouldn't have been passed. So I think that's a real shame on the state government, and I'm hopeful that they reconsider, but of course that's dreaming, they won't, and we'll see where we go next. And as Councillor Elliott has said, we're now probably out of the equation here, but that doesn't mean we should just give up. I think we still need to be keeping an eye on this. And I also agree with Councillor Elliott that if this is forced through and does go to to a development stage, that we need to be keeping an eye on how we push for the additional things that have been ignored by this proposal. And I don't think the council should be covering the costs of additional infrastructure to support this project. And there's a couple of other points I'll make just quickly. That I'm concerned about the economics, like I said before. Other things could have stacked up even better than this project had they been given the due analysis. And little things like, I was looking today at the PW1, which a lot of money was spent on developing that, and it sits empty most of the time. And that has the capacity to hold conferences for up to 1,200 people. Bit of a white elephant sometimes it's used regularly, but not as much as it could. And I would hate to think a stadium gets built that sits there with tumbleweeds blowing through it, that's used limited times per year, and the rest of the time it's not used because nobody can afford to hire it out. So if it's going to be set aside for corporate functions, that's one aspect, but what's the community elements that will be built into this? Can we all go and use the cricket nets? You know, can we afford to have functions there? I just think there's a lot more understanding that needs to be had with this project if it gets up. And I hope the council can be looking into those things as well to make sure that this facility is not just exclusive for football, expensive conferences and expensive concerts. I'm also appalled that the heritage of the site is also missing here. There's a whole lot of elements that I believe are really important to Hobart. The engineering building. This is not complementary to that building. And I remember years ago, probably 20 odd years ago, when the hotel went up behind the strip of heritage buildings at Hunter Street. And there was a hullabaloo about the sawtooth edge protruding over the backdrop of the heritage buildings. And I remember the debate at the time, you know, should this be impacting on the heritage quality of Hunter Street? And that got up and people were outraged because of the backdrop. Now we've got an even bigger backdrop. I can't remember the exact words that Councillor Kelly referred to, but
Big Mac.
The Big Mac. The Big Mac over the back of the Hunter Street Heritage Precinct. That's one of the most important streets in the country. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, as well as the red shed, the good shed, the vistas from the cenotaph, the blocked views that will occur. So many red flags with this project, and to push it through is a real, shame.
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to make a number of observations and just very simple points, because the points have already been raised. In my observations, I would like to say that we, as a council, there are 12 of us, and it is my view that some of us from the very beginning may have been supporting the stadium. That's our personal view, that's our personal position, and we are simply being honest. Some of us would support it. Some of us don't support it, and we maintain that position. And there are those in the middle who are sitting on the fence waiting to see which way the evidence was going to come. But none of us, as it were, stamped our feet, we cried, this is no good. None of us said that. There's no record where anyone I've heard saying that they don't approve of this. In my view, what happened is that this is now embarrassing. Not for us, but embarrassing for the government. Embarrassing because they mucked up the whole fiasco about the building of the ship. And you can go on and talk about things. But what I'm saying, it is not for us to be embarrassed. What we are doing as a council now, it has come to us. It's a matter of timing. We did not say anything. We sat there quietly. We were in the workshop, didn't take our position. So it happens that after all that process, we are now making our position and our attitude and our position very clear. Those are my observations. But on the other hand, for me, here are the facts. And the facts are these. That there was a process that was set in place by the government. We adhered to that. We accepted that process and we said we will go along with that particular process. When negative evidence started to emerge, quite convincingly, the state government shifted their own position and their mindset. They changed their attitude. It wasn't us. It was like, I'm now taking my ball and my bat, I'm going to go away, even though I've set this particular process. So what I'm saying, we did not in any way comment about things. We were waiting for the process to finish. Now, what happens here, for me, is that the Hobart City Council, the staff have done the work, they have provided the submission. And it is a brilliant submission because on the whole, if you look at any particular argument about things, always look at the pros and the cons. What are the benefits and what are the advantages or disadvantages? So when I read the submission by staff, there are greater evidence in arguments presented that is on the negative side to asking questions and not approving it, as it were, then yes, there is heaps of evidence, we should support it. That's the way I read the submission. It is the council staff's position not to take a political position. They can't do that. They make their submission very plain, very clear, very professional. And that's their position. But you and I are elected members. That is their position. We have to now form our position as elected members. This is given to us. We have looked at the submission. I've looked at it, read it, spent hours and hours reading this, and come to the conclusion that having read the evidence, the facts and the arguments, that we should now take a position as a council. And that's what we're doing. We take the submission of the staff and we put this as our motion to say, please go and do a bit more because we have got to make the decision. It's not the staff signature, it is the council decision and position that we're taking. And hence, all what I'm saying, that I don't see that we have in the past taken a position on that, even though we may either support it or not support it. Now we can, because we have the evidence before us, we have the submission, we've got to make a decision. Thank you.
Alderman Zuko.
Yes, Lord Mayor, through you to the CEO. Dear CEO, could you please let the council know the economic benefits in dollar terms to the City of Hobart should this stadium be built?
So one of the officers.
One of the officers, you could.
I think this material was provided in the reports.
Lord Mayor, I'm asking a question. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. But, I might need to ask you to put some of these in writing if there's things that are...
Lord Mayor, you didn't ask other people to put questions in writing this evening.
There haven't been that many questions. I think this might be one of our first. But yes, Officer, would the officer like... Oh, Mr Noy, would you like to...
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And this is based on the AEC report. The gross regional product is expected post-construction annually at 87 million.
The secondary question, I'm still on questions at this point in time, was that a report commissioned by the Hobart City Council?
Mr Noy, if you'd like to respond to that, but it's really important that questions...
Lord, I am getting to my debate. Okay, please, right. I'm asking my questions. I'm entitled to.
There are limits around the way questions are asked, but yes. Mr Noy.
Yeah, look, it was commissioned by officers of the Hobart City Council.
Okay. Which brings me to my point of debate. We've got the officers of the Hobart City Council drafting this submission. And then on the other hand, we've got the officers of the Hobart City Council seeking an economic impact on the benefits of the stadium. I think the statements made by my esteemed colleague, Councillor Dudder, counterbalance each other, because he said there's the good, the bad, the ugly, the bad, the ugly. So there's two components to this whole debate. There's a submission because there has been debate and discussion in workshops to not support this project, but in all, the council officers have been doing their work to see what the benefits are to this council. I represent the citizens, the ratepayers, and those who visit the city of Hobart. And if there's going to be an economic return for this city, I will support that. Councillor Alderman Bloomfield raised a point. Did we go through this complete process in a bikeway in Collins Street? Absolutely not. Before the project, we are now doing all that work after the project. So it seems that we've got this imbalance. What also annoys me is there's been an attack on the government tonight. Yes, of course they are the government. Yes, of course they are the ones putting up the legislation and legislative changes, but they're only doing so because the Labor Party are fully supporting them. It's called numbers, and we all know politics is about numbers. There is no way known the Premier will be so stupid to try and make any changes to the floor of Parliament unless the Labor Party had full support before it gets on the floor of Parliament. So we have the majority representation in this state being the Liberal Party and the Labor Party putting this all forward, not simply the Liberal government. So let's get that clear. That is what's happening. And we all know how politics works because it happens around this table. We all go around and talk to each other and say, will you support this, will you support that? And at the moment, the Rockcliffe government has the Labor Party fully supporting this project that the Hobart City Council is jumping up and down about because it's got no say in the matter. If we were really intelligent, what we should be going is saying, dear Premier, dear Mr Winter, when the DA is, when all the information is collated, please come and sit down and sit with us so we can give you our feedback rather than sitting here through the chamber, bringing in motions that are that long it's unbelievable, and amendments, which again I'm going to state, this is a type of thing that should have gone through the committee's process to have it debated in a proper manner, rather than the ad hoc situation we have at this point in time. I will give you my personal view, and I've said it in this chamber before. I don't prefer the site at the moment, but that's my personal preference. I've always stated that the TCA is the best place, but it'll never happen there. That's my personal position. I do support STRA too, but at the end of the day, I'm a realist. And the reality is, can I have an extension of 3 minutes, please? That gives me 3.5. Thank you.
Moved by Deputy, second by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Against say no.
Thank you. The reality is we have no say in the matter. We can jump up and down all we want. We should be going down this track, as I said already, in a proactive manner, not a reactive manner, and that's what we're doing. Just like we did, and just like we're doing to try and see if we can knock on the door of the AFL. Look, the AFL have come here that many times. They don't want to come to this council because they already, and for years even when the previous CEO was there, did not want to speak to this council. I have it on good authority because I know, because they spoke to me about it, but they don't want to speak to the council. I wonder why. If we really want to speak to the AFL, we shouldn't be doing it within this chamber. I would have preferred the CEO ring the AFL and say, hey, can we have a little chat? Because that's the way business operates. We're not operating like a business. We're operating to ensure that the leftist people at state parliament, right, have got another voice in this chamber. And we are damaging the reputation of this city. We are damaging the city by destroying it in the manner we did with Collins Street, and now we're doing it here. Again, I'm going to keep on repeating this. This is not my preferred site for an AFL stadium, but Marty Zuko has no say in it. It's been taken right out of my hands. It's been taken out of everyone's hands in this chamber. Our council officers, we're wasting money on something that we are being laughed at. The AFL is laughing at us. The commentators are laughing at us, and everyone's laughing at us. And I'm sorry. I seriously ask you all to really consider what you're actually doing to this city. Because it's not just about no AFL stadium, no team. That is the agenda. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, if there's not an excavator in the ground and the AFL can see something's happening, I assure you there won't be no AFL team. And that economic benefit of $190 odd million to boost our CBD, who's struggling because we're putting bikeways everywhere, it's not going to happen. And I'm not going to be the one voting for it. I'm not going to be in a dream zone and thinking that the AFL is going to come to us and say, oh yes, Hobart City Council, we are listening to you. Please. I operate in the business world, not the world of dreams and fairies.
Any further discussion on the motion as amended?
It's the original motion. No, I've spoken. I'm just saying we have already spoken on the amendment. It's already included. It's already. Yeah. So, yeah.
This motion has been amended.
So,
yeah. Any further discussion on the motion as amended? Going once, going twice. Okay, I will speak about a few things. I just wanted to bring people just a little bit back down to earth, because we're hearing a lot about some quite strong observations that I don't agree with about destroying cities and foot stamping and these kind of things. I mean, what we're doing tonight is we are, for the first time really, putting the council's name on a submission. And this is the first time that the council has actually taken a very specific stance on this proposal. This proposal has been around for now quite a number of years, and I think this council actually, quite contrary to some of the rhetoric about foot stamping and dreams and fairy tales, this council, and I think the staff would agree, has pretty much said almost nothing much strongly against the stadium, and we did put some faith in the POS process. We also put faith in the waiting for the staff's advice. And then when the other professional advice started coming in from the Tas Planning Commission and the EPA, I mean the word from the experts and a whole range of institutions became incredibly compelling and incredibly concerning about a project that has been incredibly poorly conceived. The embarrassing thing isn't organisations like the Tasmanian Planning Commission and the Environmental Protection Authority and a whole range of other, and Hobart City Council looking at a project with detail and with care for the future and for the future of the city. That's not what's embarrassing. What's embarrassing is when an organisation, one of the most well-resourced organisations in the country, basically comes and tries to act as the planning authority for a city and actually sets aside a really well-supported, popular vision for Macquarie Point. The Mona vision and its adaptation was, everybody loved it, and it had a whole range of facilities and economic development opportunities that would have led to a precinct, a strategic precinct that had Antarctic and Science precincts and potentially a convention centre, commercial property, a nationally significant art park, housing. I mean, this was a very, very popular project, all approved, all ready to go. And an organisation comes in and talks to the Premier and says, no, that's where we want our stadium. And unlike any other team in the country, you have to build a stadium to get your team. Now, that's what's embarrassing. That is just the most atrocious process that we have witnessed. But we have waited until this point as an organisation to weigh up all the evidence in front of us. And I've got to say, in the last few weeks, seeing the evidence come in from the Tasmanian Planning Commission, I became quite horrified about things I wasn't aware of. And so I think it's incredibly appropriate that this submission combines both the advice and expertise of the staff and the judgment calls on behalf of the community that we're democratically elected to represent, and that the submission is a merging of those views and concerns. There's things in this submission that I still feel we could put more in. You know, I think there's we've heard from staff over a number of months now about the information concerns that we've been provided by the proponent. The fact that we never got a 3D model, so we are flying blind as a city as to how this will actually impact on the city. We haven't really, I don't think, made a strong enough point about the environmental standards of the building. I know that was something that we raised in an earlier submission. In fact, I think we should be going back to our... Oh, can I get an extra 2 minutes, please? Moved by Deputy, seconded by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Thank you. So I think we could go back to some of our earlier work. We put in submissions on the precinct plan, we put in submissions on the draft guidelines, and the council did make some decisions about things that I think could be better reflected in the submission. We made a very strong point that we think that the Reconciliation Art Park should have been retained. That has just sort of slid into nowhere. We made a statement. We made a statement how important the journeys to the stadium in the government's own reports suggest that 8% of people, I think, will be getting to the stadium by bike, and the submission seems a little bit light on the importance of the government actually helping to make that happen rather than opposing that sort of infrastructure to allow that. So there are things that I think the submission could include, but it doesn't. It isn't personal, as Alderman Zuko said. It is a merging of professional advice and feedback that Council has received from other organisations. But I think the amendments will allow the staff. It's not a complete rewrite by any stretch of the imagination. It's a few sections where the elected members, because we haven't workshopped this, have quite rightly brought forward additional matters that they think need to be included. And I think the final product will be an important piece of work that the Council can stand by, and the Council will be talking about in a range of forums for a number of years to come, because this will be a debate in our city for many years to come. There will be many more chapters. Our door is always open for whether it's organisations or levels of government to talk to us. We are democratically elected by our community. This organisation has a lot of experience and expertise in what makes a city work and the things that will work for Hobart. And I trust that this submission will be a really important part of that conversation. Thank you. Okay.
Excuse me, Lord.
Yes.
Am I able to ask a question? Yeah. Thank you. If this proposal, the exact plan we've got there now for roof, was to be withdrawn for an amended version, i.e. a stadium slightly different in scale, shape and with no roof, would that just keep sailing through as if this was the same application, or would it require a new process?
The CEO Mallet.
We'd be speculating a bit in terms of what the legislation that ultimately comes from Parliament, what it enables, whether they can have a modified proposal. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see that legislation.
Okay, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.
Aye.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Favour, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Harvey, the Deputy and the Mayor.
And against?
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Alderman Bloomfield.
Okay, that motion has been carried. So we will now move on to our next item, which is item 11. Would someone like to move? That's the Macquarie Point Stadium post-elector poll report. Moved by Councillor Lohberger, seconded by Deputy Lord Mayor. There's a recommended motion that's been moved. Any discussion?
Yes, I've got a question. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Through you to the relevant director. Section 60B of the Local Government Act, item number 2, says that an elector poll can be conducted in any manner the council determines when it's a council-initiated elector poll. I'd like to find out if that was considered when writing the report, because it's not mentioned at all, and obviously would have an effect on the quoted cost of an elector poll.
Through you, Chair. Look, yes, that was considered. You will see in the report where I had preliminary conversations and advice from the Tasmanian Electoral Commission. In their experience, they were unaware of a single example of where a council had run its own elector poll as opposed to putting it through the Tasmanian Electoral Commission to run for them. I accepted that advice and it's reflected in the report. The second bit I'd say is that I don't necessarily agree that Section 60B is read down to say that we can hold an elector poll in any manner we see fit. I don't think it's an absolute. I think there's some boundaries around that, around the rigour for how it would need to be run. I read that more down around the subject matter for how you would be wanting to determine by an elector poll as opposed to the process.
Further discussion? Councillor Kitsos, did you want to?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Officer, for that that summary. I'm just wondering, I have heard anecdotally that perhaps you could do an elector poll online for a lesser cost, and that would potentially be acceptable under the Act. Clearly, we would need to take some more guidance around that, but I think it opens, potential discussion for what topics we consider appropriate for an elector poll if the cost was to be reduced. So I think it is worth considering, because I note that the report, if in my mind, that we've been provided with hinges around two things, which is the cost of the elector poll, which is about $250,000, and also the timing of the elector poll to engage the TSC to actually put a postal ballot out is likely to occur after the debate in Parliament, although we don't have any confirmation of the debate when the legislation will go through the floor of Parliament as well. So I guess I'm a little bit on the fence here. I would really like to know what our ratepayers think about the stadium, and I do think that if it was to show that there is no support for the stadium, that it would place the government in a somewhat awkward position, which may encourage them to stick with the POS process and re-look at the application to make it more compliant or beneficial to the state. So I think there is some benefit there, but without that extra information on the possibility of other ways we could conduct the poll, I guess my vote's unclear at this stage.
Further discussion? Alderman Bloomfield.
It would have to be enormously cheaper for this to be considered standard, normal, ordinary, because in this chamber, anything that costs in excess of, say, $10,000 or $15,000, it suddenly becomes quite material to be debated and considered to be inappropriate to spend, which is fair. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. So it would have to be enormously cheaper. The second thing is that this particular project, I think we're being a little bit myopic with it, because absolutely, it affects our council area, absolutely. But it's a project of effectively state significance, so we're discounting the rest of the state. And I don't think that would be necessarily appropriate, because this is something that impacts far more than just our city. So in order to do this, I think that it would give a very narrow view, and as we all know, it's nothing that will be binding, and in particular it will be nothing that will likely influence either, unfortunately. So as a theoretical concept, we've opened the door as possibly for other concepts, but just remember that if this costs anything more than $10,000 or $15,000, even with an online consideration, we are suddenly going to be ramping up rates to pay for these quizzes on our public, when we really should be simply using consultation.
Councillor Dutta.
Lord Mayor, just a question for clarification. Has the recommendation been moved or not?
Yes, it has.
All right. Okay. I am of the view that we had made a decision on council that we asked for a report, and the report has come, and the report has recommended that we don't proceed with this, and I will support this recommendation, considering the facts and the arguments presented. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I just want to start off by saying a particular quote from the University of Chicago's economist, Alan Sanderson, and he said, "If you want to inject money into the local economy, it would be better to drop it off from a helicopter than invest it in a new ballpark." I think this particular elector poll that, and the reference and the comments that Councillor Kitsos has made, I would really be interested too. I'd like to know. And yes, of course, it is a project of state significance, and we can, effectively and affirmatively argue that point. But what we can also consider is what is on the first page of our report here before, which is item number 10, and how we actually, how the City of Hobart actually applies in this particular context to the stadium. And I want to note the role that the City of Hobart plays. And the role that we play is this: the council of the municipality in which the project is located the agency or the planning authority as defined under the State Projections and Policies Act, an asset owner of local roads, footpaths and car parks, stormwater and lighting and infrastructure, an adjoining landowner to the project of state significance declared project area, a city shaper determining the future strategic land use planning agenda for the city, as the responsible agency for enforcing a range of planning permit conditions, and as advocate representing a range of different community views on issues such as Aboriginal cultural values. So I think we have a significant role. And while it may be within the scheme of the project of state significance, I think these roles that I've just outlined, I would also like to know, what our particular ratepayers think. I do appreciate the recommendation that has come from the staff. And I'm just a little bit torn, I suppose, in which way to go. So thank you, Lord Mayor.
Any further discussion? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. It will be interesting to know, but I won't be supporting it. I'll be supporting the recommendation that we don't go ahead with an electoral poll for two reasons. Because I think we need to constantly remind ourselves of not to be so insular in our thinking and thinking that our LGA is the knower of all things and they're the only people that we need to talk to or represent or consider, especially when of a project of this scale, and given we are the CBD and this is a statewide asset. Also, the fact is we've already had the best electoral poll there is in the form of a state election, and the election was basically a yes or no to the stadium question for many people, and the yes won marginally. It's happened. We've had the electoral poll.
Councillor Lohberger.
I'm not sure where those maths come from Councillor Elliott. For instance, in the Hobart electorate, 5 out of the 7 elected people at last year's election stood against the stadium. 5 out of 7. Now, the fact is the Labor Party has changed its mind since the election and basically, in my opinion, really betrayed a lot of its voters. But that doesn't mean that the result of the election has changed. The result of the election was that in this electorate, 5/7 were against and 2/7 were for. So we have had the poll. I do agree with Councillor Elliott on that particular point, and I will be supporting this particular recommendation as well. But I do think, anyone who thinks that the last election showed support for the poll, for the stadium, really needs to actually recognise that Labor changed their mind afterwards and has sort of distorted the views of the parliamentarians effectively, given what they were elected on. I am also interested in 60B. It does actually say, that an electoral poll under subsection 1 may be conducted in any manner the council determines. I just think, it would be interesting to know if we could do these things a bit more cheaply. However, I'm not going to be voting against the recommendation on that basis, so I think maybe something to pursue later through other channels. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Lord Mayor, I appreciate Councillor Lohberger's contribution there about the state election, and also Councillor Elliott's reflections on the state election. The most important polls are the election polls, and people of Hobart have spoken, and that's why we have this arrangement around the table. But my favourite poll of all time was the cable car poll, which came back from those who did it. I can't remember who it was, EMRS maybe, and it said that 73% of people support a cable car. But when you dug into the questions, of the 73% of people that said, do you support a cable car, when asked, do you know anything about a cable car, nearly all of them said no. So I really don't pay much attention to polls. Recent one on Collins Street, 80% of whatever it was said they didn't support the Collins Street. When asked how many people, it was 96 people. So there's a lot of nonsense around polls, so I'm not interested in having an elected poll either, so I'll be supporting the motion here tonight.
Councillor Kitsos, you've spoken. You want to ask a question?
I did want to ask a question. Just the recommendation that we're voting on tonight, it says that the second part of the statement is and determined not to proceed with an elector poll. Can I just gain some clarity around, are we talking about proceeding with an elector poll right now? If next month the government's position on the stadium has changed, can we actually bring a motion to commence an elector poll?
Mr Young might like to talk about changing our position. I think you'd need 7 votes of council. Is that right?
Through you, Lord Mayor. So as it is for the recommendation as written in the agenda, you need 7 for it to be, to overturn it, to run a poll, if that makes sense, because you've got a previous decision of council around the budget. So look, I don't think the timelines necessarily work if we come back to it later on. There are unknowns with the state legislative timetable and things like that, but as it sits tonight, the officer advice is to not proceed. So it's basically the resolution is to do nothing, to not to disturb the waters. We've had a look at it, we've given the advice as requested by the planning committee and brought it in here. Council can always revisit that at any time later on once we know a little bit more, but yeah, it is a slightly unusual one where we find ourselves tonight.
Councillor Kelly.
I support the officer's recommendation not for a poll. I mean, we're one of 27 councils. We're 29 councils. We're less than 10% of the population. I just think it smacks of a bit of arrogance to think that we're the supreme beings in the estate. So we can bend statistics and facts and figures all we want to get the answer we want here, but I support the officer's recommendation with no poll. Thank you.
Alderman Zuko.
I wasn't going to speak, Lord Mayor, but I sit here and I thought this was just going to go through and just be received and noted and move on. I just cannot believe it. Like, we all know that no matter what happens in an elector poll, the council doesn't have to do anything. I could just imagine it. You know, let's hypothetically say the elector poll come out and 99.9% of people don't want the stadium. What is the council going to do about it? Let me think. King Charles, can you please tell me? Sorry, nothing. King Charles has told me nothing because there's nothing we can do about it. The only people that can do something about it is the Labor and Liberal Party. So may I please give some advice to my fellow elected members. Go and knock on the door of Dean Winter and go and knock on the door of Jeremy Rockcliffe and complain over there. Because they're the people you have to convince. Because if you don't convince them, we can have elector polls. We can jump up and down. I've asked Prince Charles and he couldn't give me an answer. Please. I've just wasted another 2.5 minutes of my life. We've just wasted more time for the people, the poor people out there. This should have just been received and noted because it doesn't matter what happens in an elector poll. We have no say. We cannot act upon it. We're wasting time, we're wasting money. And what's coming up? We're going to be soon raising making people pay more for things. No wonder, because we've probably wasted so much money on a report on this elector poll that we can't do anything about. Please, let's get on with some real action.
All right. Any further discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 12 is 2025-26 fees and charges from the Tasmanian Travel and Information Centre. Seconded by Councillor Harvey. Any discussion? Councillor Lohberger.
I just had a question, Lord Mayor, about the future of the kiosk in the Elizabeth Mall. I was wondering if someone could answer that for me.
Through you, Lord Mayor, a report's coming to Council in June to look at putting an EIA out to the market to look at options for the mall move going forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further discussion on this
I just have a question.
Alderman Bloomfield.
I'm really kind of happy to see that we're amending these figures, which is great. But there's no actual direct line here suggesting that the TTIC will be breaking even, making a profit. Where are we heading with that? Is there a generic expectation with that on the budget?
Through you, Lord Mayor, I'll take that one on notice and get a more definitive answer, but the aim of the TTIC is to move towards a break-even or be as profitable as possible, but currently we're not in that position.
Any further discussion? There being none, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. All those in favour, raise your hand.
Councillor Dutta, Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Harvey, the Deputy and the Mayor.
And against?
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly.
That's carried. Move on now to item 13, the venue hire policy. There is a recommended motion. If someone would like to move that. Moved by Councillor Kitsos, seconded by Councillor Lohberger. Any discussion? We've taken this to workshop before. Councillor Kelly, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Is this a new policy for the council? Is this the first time council's approved it?
Yeah, it's the first time it's been would be approved by the council.
Thank you. I'll just make a point then. The report that accompanies this policy talks a lot about balloons and glitter, but it doesn't talk about the true genesis of this policy, which is two women's rights events that the council attempted to block in a discriminatory way and then did block the second one in a case of direct discrimination. So I think it was a bit... don't mention the war in the report. That I think that history should have been in the officer report. It's important to know how this policy came about because it informs, I guess, the issue that the policy seeks to address. And I would put glitter and balloons at the bottom of the issue and not discriminating against political beliefs at the top. So I've got some questions and comments here to make. Under the policy itself, background 2.2, it talks about the facilities being available for a wide range of public, civic, private, commercial, cultural, social, recreational uses. A comment I'd like to have, and I haven't decided whether I'll make this an amendment yet or hope that it's captured in the recommendation where the CEO can make edits. I would like to have politically added in there because obviously political participation is equally as important. I have an apology from the council to say that it will support political involvement and diversity. So I think politically needs to be added through this policy, especially given the highly charged political environment in this council and its proven tendency to block and silence differing political beliefs. Question around Section 3, 3.2, I've got a question around. It says that priority, 3.2 says priority of use will be given to regular and ongoing City of Hobart initiated programs and activities for bookings, but then at 3.3 it said the bookings will be managed on a first in, so first come basis. So in real life, what does that mean? Does that mean that if someone has a booking on Wednesday the 12th and the City of Hobart decides later that it wants Wednesday the 12th, does that mean, because you got first in and then you got priority, if someone's first in, can that be overridden with priority?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. The way I understand that is if there's a standard booking, so we have committee meetings, as we do for different, that would take priority. So they're monthly or they're bi-monthly or whatever. So that's what we're saying. So then it would be a case of if it's not booked for an ongoing council, then it would be first in, first best dressed.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
And we can address that first question you asked, Lord Mayor, because if you'd like.
About
political?
Yeah. Thank you. Through you, Lord Mayor. Look, I did think long and hard on that one, Councillor Elliott, and got some external advice as well around this, and the advice was actually not to define or name political events in the policy, because then the argument turns on what's a political event. We should just be having a policy that allows for the lawful booking of our facilities for regardless of what the purpose is. It could be a birthday party. Provided it's a lawfully held event, it's provided for under the policy, and political type gatherings are a subset of that, so hence they're not specifically defined.
Okay, that's interesting, because we've spelt out politically as a standalone thing in our social inclusion policy, and we've got social and recreational and other subheadings here. Okay, right. I still think it should be added, but anyway. And I think political makes sense to be added because political belief is a prescribed attribute under the Anti-Discrimination Act, Section 19. So I think it would make sense for it to be added and be explicit, because the situation I'm trying to prevent is obvious. I'm trying to prevent a case where different political beliefs can be blocked from booking council venues. So that's a statement rather than a question, unless, yeah. Also 3.3, it says that bookings will be managed in a first-in basis to ensure that eligible commercial and community organisations are not discriminated against. That's a sentence that can't be said, because a booking made on a first-come, first basis doesn't stop discrimination being held. A lot of other factors have to happen to stop discrimination. That sentence isn't valid, if that makes sense. 3.4.2, around the terminology, throughout the policy, it uses different terms interchangeably, and I think it would make much more sense to get them consistent, like the suitability of an event, the appropriateness of an event, the reasonableness of the event. I think it would make sense to have them all the consistent language. 3.4.2 again, what is meant by that consideration? It says that each application will be considered having regard to, and it has a list of things. One of them is the suitability of the proposed use. Can I get some more information about what's meant by that, the suitability of the proposed use?
Look, it's hard to give an exhaustive list, Councillor Elliott, but I'll give you one example. So on my time here, we had a booking for the hall room for a funeral service that involved the bringing of a casket into the workplace and taking it through the lift. Now, the ballroom's on the first floor, so there's a range of issues there around the suitability of that venue for that type of event, as opposed to a venue that might be on the ground floor. It's an operational type suitability.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was what I was getting to. Was it around the suitability of the nature of the event, or suitability of the space itself to hold and things like that? So is it more about the space of the space and logistics? Okay, thanks. 3.5.2, it refers to the CEO assessing an application, and it might include coordinating with, consulting, cooperate or coordinate with any third parties who may, in the CEO's reasonable opinion, have a legitimate interest in the use. Can you give me some examples of what that might be? Who would be a third party that would have a legitimate interest in the use?
One example would be Tasmania Police. So let's say we had an event proposed for Town Hall in the ballroom that's likely to see a counter-protest out on the street. Obviously, Tasmania Police may have a view on that from a public safety and traffic management point of view. Yeah, thanks.
So in the situation of what happened with my case, it wouldn't be lobbyists on the alternative, aren't a third party with a legitimate interest? No? It would be people like police, caterers, audio-visual, that sort of stuff? Yep. I'm sorry to have to spell this out. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with what this policy means, because we're going to get requests for venues that this council doesn't like. 3.6, given that some venues are workplaces for city staff, an application will be considered against applicable laws, and obviously one of those is anti-discrimination laws. and it will only be approved, events will only be approved if the CEO is satisfied that their proposed use doesn't breach a legislative requirement. Can I have an example, or what sort of bookings might we get that would breach the Anti-Discrimination Act?
I mean, there's a couple of there's moving parts in that, Councillor Elliott. So the Anti-Discrimination Act, in terms of the hire, is one point, but then there's a series of obligations for Mr Stratton for the workforce, and there's obviously a tension with those two where you can't discriminate, obviously, but you also have to provide a safe workplace so far as reasonably possible. So again, Town Hall is a workplace as well as a venue hire, which is why we've reflected that in the policy. So on an event like that, then the discretion would be to run a risk assessment over it if there was ever a question, rather than historically it's been a more arbitrary process.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Elliott, you're referring to numbers that I don't have on my list here.
On the policy itself? In the supporting documents?
Yeah, I'm looking in the supporting documents, and mine ends at 3.32.
I'm on 3.6.
What page?
Page 42 of the...
Okay, all right.
Okay. 3.7, it also refers to that applications be considered against section 3.6 of the social inclusion policy. Well, I couldn't find any section 3.6 in that social inclusion policy, but it is under section 4, so I think that's a correction that needs to be made. I think section 3.9 and 3.10 need to be rewritten, especially 3.9 because it doesn't make sense. 3.11 says that the risk assessment may include a list of things, blah, blah, blah. One of them is 3.11.6 brand. Can I have some examples of the type of events that might be relevant under brand?
I'd have to take that one on notice, Councillor. I didn't author the report. We'd have to go and talk to the authors on that. Take it on notice.
Okay, thank you. .14, the CEO may refuse applications that are incompatible with this policy or any other applicable council policy, or that in their reasonable opinion are unlawful. Unlawful, self-explanatory. But I have real concerns, and I want to get crystal clear, given past behaviour is the best indicator of future behaviour. Would the council has different positions and policies on different issues? For example, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the council just majority approved that it does not support the stadium earlier tonight. So I imagine that would be a council policy. Would it therefore be that a pro-stadium event could not be held at council venues?
So look, I'll speak in generalisations, Councillor Elliott, because I've dealt with this in a few scenarios here. So where there is a direct conflict or inconsistency with the law or a council policy, the law prevails, full stop. Council can, by its own decision, have policies on anything it wants, but if it's in tension or conflict with the relevant legislation, it's voidable. So for your example around the stadium, I would say two things. So I would not expect there to be a declining of an event that was pro-stadium, but it would also fall under your earlier contribution around a political event. So I would very much expect it to be approved.
Exactly.
So, Councillor Elliott, can I just a procedural matter? So just on, this is a long list of questions which there are, as chair, I can ask when I feel that maybe there's questions are basically getting to a level that probably we should be deferring this back to workshop again. I think we did that last time, but I am going to actually ask for any further questions to be put in writing, because a lot of these questions are now, difficult to answer on the spot, and maybe they do need the questions taken on notice. So if you still think this document needs further workshopping, perhaps it should be deferred for a second time back to workshop. I'm wondering why some of these weren't sort of considered or raised, because this did come to workshop, I think, didn't it? And I'm not sure if this is the same version that's come to the workshop or been changed. That definitely. But anyway, so that's yeah. Would you like to defer it? Or?
I'm nearly finished.
Okay, just a couple more, but yeah, the chair can ask for questions to be put in writing, which I don't do very often, but when it starts becoming, we've sort of got a long list of questions.
Yeah.
And you still have time on the clock to actually make your contribution.
Yes,
so, yeah.
And that's pretty much what I'm going to now. So I'll keep thinking about whether to defer or not. I guess that it is troubling that 3.14 where it says the CEO may refuse applications that are incompatible with this policy or any other applicable council policy. And I think that, I'd personally like to see that reworked. For example, we can find ourselves in the position where we get applications to book council venues for things that the majority of this council doesn't agree with, or that it even has an explicit position on, or a policy. For example, we might get pro-forestry, pro-salmon, anti-abortion, the Jewish committee wanting to come and use. We could get pro-nuclear, we could get anti-bike lanes, anti-net zero, all these other arguably political beliefs, one being religious belief. But I wanted to, given history, get on the record that all of these issues and more should be permitted to absolutely use our venues. And I would hate to see the council try to use a get out jail free card that the event is inconsistent with their policy and therefore can't rent the venue. Because I agree with Mr Young that the Anti-Discrimination Act completely overrides whatever policy exists, which is why I will move a formal amendment to section 3.14 to take out incompatible with the council's policy and just have only the events that can be refused are unlawful events.
Seconder for that, Councillor Kelly. So any discussion on the amendment?
Quickly, because I think we'd need to take some advice around that. It's a pretty blanket statement. Like, again, there might be something that is certainly not unlawful, but does create, like it's a workplace, for instance, is particularly loud or a particularly, event that's not compatible with the environment, then, it might be one that, on that grounds, that we would say, no, it's best to have that elsewhere. But because that change makes it absolute. And I'm certainly not adverse to continuing to withdraw this and continue to workshop it if that's the preference, because there's quite a few matters that have been raised that are certainly open to modifying.
Just so we can do a procedure, can I just ask a question if the CEO would be happy to have it deferred to another workshop? Is that okay? Yep. So can I move a motion for deferral then?
I think you probably can.
Yeah.
So moved, motion for deferral, seconded by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 14 is the annual progress report for the period ending 31 May.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Harvey, seconded by seconder for that one, Councillor Kitsos. Any discussion? Did this one come to a workshop?
I'd have to check.
It did, yeah. Ms Eaton said. So I'm assuming that at the workshop you would have had a chance to ask questions about the progress. So I'll just put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 15 is a motion from Alderman Bloomfield. I'll pass over to Alderman Bloomfield.
I don't have a seconder yet.
Moved by, I think, Councillor Lohberger had it.
Sorry.
She was moving it, I'm just seconding it for her.
Yeah, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Lohberger.
Okay, so this particular motion was prescribed as part of a state government initiative, and I just have a little bit of a forward towards this.
Sorry, a Legat initiative, is it?
Yeah, thank you. So, fellow councillors, I felt it was time that we talked about the spirit in this room and the tone that we set and the legacy we leave. When we entered public life, we took on more than responsibilities. We took on a duty to lead, not just with decisions, but with how we debate, how we listen, and how we treat one another. We must be mindful. Every word spoken here shapes how our community sees itself. If we let anger creep in, we teach anger. If we let contempt take root, we teach contempt. But if we show generosity and kindness, we teach hope. We show Hobart that strength and courtesy are not enemies, but old friends walking side by side. Kindness does not mean we surrender passion. Generosity does not mean we abandon conviction. A decision should rise collegially, above just having the numbers, by allowing amendments from those who are not of the same frame of mind, so the entire room has the ability to take ownership of the final product. This is generosity and this is kindness. It means we argue better and we listen harder. We fight for ideas without ruining each other's dignity along the way. Decisions made in a chamber of respect are stronger, not weaker. In a generous room, fresh ideas breathe, unexpected solutions arise, and we've seen that with an earlier one with the sand on Carnelian Bay. And we work together not as rivals, but as an architect of the future. And I'll say this plainly, the louder the world grows, the more important it is that this chamber remains calm, clear and steady, not just for ourselves, but for every Hobartian who places their trust in us. Let us lift the tone, let us lift each other, and through that, lift our whole city. I commend this motion.
Further discussion? If there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 16 is responses to questions without notice. Moved. Moved by Councillor Harvey, seconded by Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say...
May I ask a question?
No, that's not at this stage. This is just the responses, accepting the responses.
Responses.
In the next section, yep. All those in favour say aye, against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 17 should be questions without notice. Section 17, questions without notice. Councillor Lohberger, I think, did want to ask a question.
I just wanted to ask, I feel like there was a slight difference in the agenda from the draft that we were shown with the responses to questions. Is that correct?
Look, it is correct. It's not something that we're able to discuss tonight, so it's not something I'll elaborate on further. So.
Chair.
Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thanks, Lord Mayor. My question relates to the Collins Street elector poll and whether that's a petition's been received with the appropriate numbers.
CEO.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I can confirm that we didn't receive a petition with the passing of the time frame of the 30 days has since lapsed.
Thank you.
For any further questions without notice? I've got one question just around, just an additional question that's come out of the 16.2, 3 and 4. Just wondering whether, is it possible for Council to get a very high-level summary of the 21 RTIs that have been submitted by elected members, just at a very high level, not details?
Through you, Lord Mayor, I think the answer is probably no. And the reason I say the answer is no, that in providing that, it would reasonably, in my view, lead to the identification of the applicant, because you already know by default they are an elected member, and it would be most likely a contravention of the Privacy Act if we were to do that. They make an application as an RTI, as a citizen, not as a councillor. We have to treat them that way.
The 16.4, does that say... Oh. I'm just wondering, I might have to ask it separately because I think 16.4 says something differently. But okie doke. So any other questions? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Can we just get some, I imagine we will, but just to have it on record, can we get some clarity on what happened tonight with the amendments, speaking to amendments, when you've already spoken? And also there seems to be something new happening, and I want to understand from a procedural perspective, where we have an officer report and there's a motion in there, but that motion isn't moved, an entirely different motion is moved. Can we have some clarity on when and how we can do that versus the officer report, officer motion fails and then it's a foreshadowed? Can we just have some clarity on that?
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor, there's two bits to that. I'm happy to give some advice in writing around the issue tonight, but more generally I'm happy to maybe through a workshop or however the members would like to discuss the second bit around how amendments and foreshadowed alternates work and things like that. And I think a Q&A might be more beneficial than a formal advice in that space if you're agreeable.
Yep, that'd be good. Also, I was concerned about one of the questions from the public that happened tonight. Marla Crew raised an issue around some terrible comments that have been made, and I thought it might have been something that was long ago, or our relationships with the person that did the alleged conduct has ended, but I could see in the hub that we're still involved in events with that person only recently, as of last month. So I was wondering if the CEO or the relevant person can address that with some priority.
CEO.
Thanks. Look, I can clarify. That's a matter that we are investigating right at the moment, so that's why we just held out in respect to providing a response. We definitely will provide a response ASAP. It's something that we're looking at right now, but we're just not in a position to do it tonight.
Okay, thank you. I've raised the question before around an RTI disclosure log. Are we any further in able to provide that? Or many of the other state government departments provide it. And it would answer a lot of the questions that people have around RTIs and subjects and who, and if we can get a disclosure log page, how far away are we?
Yes, we are very close. Look, I think it's weeks. So we are about to do final user acceptance testing for a range of new IT services for RTIs that go through from automation to the fee. And then the flip side of that is around the disclosure log on the website. We are working through it. So look, that'll be a little bit longer, but I would expect we're shooting to have that by the end of the financial year.
Thanks. On RTI as well, I understand that Rick Snell was doing a review of RTIs. Is the council expected to make a submission into that? I think it closes in May. I'm not exactly sure, but is that on our plate?
It is on our radar. Professor Snell and Professor McCormick, who are the co-chairs of that, have approached me, and I have had a meeting with them. It's expected I'll probably have a second catch-up with them. So yes, it is on our radar, to answer your question.
Great, thank you. Only one or two to go. Can we please be notified when the agenda is published and then it changes? Because that's quite disconcerting when, yeah. And also, Councillor Purcell published part of the agenda on Twitter, but I couldn't find that item in the agenda. So why does Councillor Purcell have access to information that isn't on our agenda?
So, look, I answered the question earlier, and the same question the same response will apply, which is not something that I'm going to elaborate on tonight.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. It's just sort of piqued my interest. Just the comments that have been made by Councillor Lohberger and Councillor Elliott. Well, I just wanted to ask, was there, so the council agenda had a particular question that was asked.
Perhaps this could be, these questions could be asked in closed. It seems like that's what the CEO would prefer, maybe.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to know why it was removed.
Can I say that if they're asked in close, I'm going to answer the same, which is, again, I'm not at liberty and won't be discussing it further tonight.
Okay, no worries, thank you.
Can I just, I think it's just important in writing, Mr. Young, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit more about an RTI disclosure log that you said's coming, and how would that be different to the document that I asked for, which was some sort of RTI log? And is there a difference in the two documents and privacy concerns? And I'm happy for you to take it on notice.
No, I can answer it. That's okay. So there's two parts to that. So in answer to your question around RTI specific to elected members and a disclosure log, they are both quite different. A disclosure log is a compilation of decisions of the organisation under the Right to Information Act, or an external review decision from the Ombudsman, and the associated tranche of documents that are released under that decision. There is no identifiable information relevant to the applicant, or even material that could reasonably lead to the identification of the applicant to be found in a disclosure log, whereas under the request for information regarding right to information applications from individuals who happen to be also councillors could reasonably lead to the identification of a councillor in a privacy breach.
All right, Alderman Bloomfield.
I just had a question, completely different. On the Lord Beach jetty, basically, I've noticed that there's been an awful lot of noise, media and so forth, in recent times, but I've not seen anything really come through council. Are we up to a new stage or point that's triggered this at all, or are we? It's just simply past progress?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. So you may recall that we brought the matter to the council some time ago with a response to an in-principle decision to as the Lord's Beach site being the preferred, and then to undertake a community engagement process. So that community engagement process has been conducted, and the results of that will be coming to, I think, the next council workshop. And then obviously we'll come to a council meeting for decision thereafter. So you will get the results of that in the next few weeks.
Any further questions? If there's no further questions, we'll move on now to the closed portion of the meeting. Now we could break here for dinner. If people, there's quite a bit on the closed agenda, so I propose that we, let's move into the closed portion, and then we'll move to adjourn the meeting for a dinner break.
Move we close the open, move into the closed.
Moved by Councillor Harvey, seconded by Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye. Against say no.